Welcome to another edition of Texas Strong's podcast. This week, as we promised in our first, we're going to continue to bring in special and iconic people in Texas. This week, we do have a special guest, Miss Jody Phillips with TDA, and we're going to talk about some controversial things. We're going to talk about deer. We're going to talk about what's going on in Texas with CWD. Miss Jody, I introduced you a little bit, but why don't you tell them a little bit about you and your background and everything, you and your husband have done on y'all's ranch, from going from cattle to deer, and what's going on?
So my husband and I started P-Bar Whitetails back in 2016. Just kind of started off as a hobby, turned into a monster. We decided we wanted some whitetail and realized we could be good at breeding them. So for our little release site, just rapidly turned into a breeding facility. Our background, both of us, is cattle. We've had cattle for years. Custom grazed cattle, all the things that the cattle industry requires, from hay production to beef. Our kids show livestock and really big into the swine part of the FFA world. We've got to know a lot of people and rung a lot of bells at major stock shows in Texas. So we have a pretty extensive feed knowledge for feeding stuff in general and
Besides
raising
kids.
animals. Yeah, besides kids, yes. And just raising animals in general. A lot of animal husbandry skills, and we know how to run a business that's livestock oriented. So,
and TPWD is helping that whitetail side, isn't
it? They're getting better at it, but they've damn near tried to kill us. So
we'll get into that. I got a lot to say there.
Yeah,
no doubt. Jody and I, just real quick, actually met. We worked at a ranch up in North Texas for a short period of time. I was on the cattle side. She was on the deer side. She's been a little humble when it comes to her background. She's a badass, and she's going to stand in front of a grown man and tell him how to count the cabbage if it's not right. So she is like she's basically a vet. I don't care what anybody says. She's pretty much a vet. You ought to see her work in those labs, man. She's got it going on. But we won't get into where we were working. We both chose to roll on and move to greener pastures. But anyway, Jody, we appreciate you being here. Thanks for taking the time, and let's get right into this deal. I guess, I made a list of a few things, but you feel free, obviously everything about this. She's not only with TDA, she's the president of TDA. So she's got a pretty extensive background there too, with the knowledge of the going-ons of everything from top to bottom, from beginning to end. So, I guess let's talk about CWD. What do you think, Jody?
Well, so it's kind of I don't know where to begin, but I'm just going to kind of start from the bottom up. So back in 21, we hit a positive at a breeding facility that had basically sent deer all over the place. At that particular point in time, we didn't have the rules that we have in place now, where you have to test ante-mortem. If you have a deer die, you have to test it within 7 days of death. Back then, you didn't have to turn them in until March, until that calendar year was over. So nobody knew that this farm had CWD until March, and he'd been shipping deer since, the previous August. So deer went out everywhere, and Texas Parks and Wildlife has what they call a trace program. So if you receive a deer from a facility that has CWD, that is called a direct trace. That animal has to be killed, and its brainstem sent to TVMDL for testing. Once that animal tests negative, your farm can be released. You are shut down until then. Where the issue arrived at that point was a lot of people had received deer from farms that had CWD positives, but they were already released into a release site, not a breeding facility. So, they'd either been shot, harvested, hunted, they died on 4,000 acres somewhere. They just were untraceable. So those farms that could not find those animals were basically shut down indefinitely at that point until we came up with a plan. Fast forward, Parks and Wildlife implements emergency rules, which is a rule that they just would pass down. They'd just be like, well, we're just going to make a new rule today. It'll shut everybody down. There was no regulatory process making those rules. So this happens, and then basically the entire industry is shut down because they decided that not only did they want to take in trace animals, they wanted to take in tier animals. So a tier animal, by definition, is an animal that was at a farm that had a trace. So that shut down everybody. Because if so-and-so had a trace animal and they couldn't find all their tiers and test their tiers or kill and test their tiers, they were shut down. So then we got herd plans, which said that basically inside of 3 years, you could ante-mortem test those, or after 3 years, you could ante-mortem test those animals. Or if they had been at your farm for 5 years, they were basically off the radar at that point of being moved. Yeah. I know that's very confusing, and it's confusing to everybody, even to Texas Parks and Wildlife. So these rules happened, and nobody really knew what they looked like until it happened. And Parks and Wildlife was kind of getting in the way of their own rules. So as a deer breeder, we were forced to ante-mortem test all animals before movement to a release site. Well, in the beginning, that rule was kind of frowned upon. Nobody wanted to have to do the testing because we only had a certain amount of time to do it. But in reality, we should have been doing that for years. It would have protected all of us years ago. Because, for the longest time, the big antis were like, well, they put deer in trailers and they haul them across Texas. We don't know if they have CWD or not. They're just hauling them off and letting them out. Well, now, before a deer is moved anywhere, whether it's moved from a breeding facility to a release site or a breeding facility to a breeding facility, it's ante-mortem tested. So that eliminates all risk of moving CWD on a trailered deer. And one thing I'd like to point out about that is even more important is, as a deer farmer, when you test your herd each year, you're not testing one buck. You're going to test all the bucks that you are going to sell. Yep. So just say you have 300 deer. It's not a far off number to say that 100 of those are bucks. You're going to want to test all the deer that you could possibly sell that year. So essentially, when you send your ante-mortem test in, you're not snapshotting one deer off of that farm. You're getting a snapshot of a whole shot of a third of the farm because you're testing a third of your farm for CWD. If it's there, you're going to find it. It's not just one animal. Yeah. So in the past, they've used that as a weapon against us. They could have that one test and that deer, they test something could have gone wrong with the test. It only has an 82% efficacy, all those things. Well, the fact that we're doing so much of it eliminates that argument completely. We've now ante-mortem tested more deer than there are standing in deer pens in the state of Texas. Yep. We'll double that here shortly before we move bucks for the year. And then, your stalker does are tested. A lot of people, in order to get out of jail, basically CWD jail, did whole herd test on one of those farms. So we went through and we tested every animal we had, which is unbelievably expensive to do. But it also gave us the leverage to be able to not be locked down and be able to do business. So we just had to put it in our operational cost and make it happen. Because of the ante-mortem testing, we do now have the ability to test out, whereas before we didn't. And with the recent things that have happened within the department and CWD positive facilities, we have been able to kind of come to some agreements on a situation where we can get unlocked. But the biggest thing, and one of the biggest things that goes on right now and that people worry about is, surveillance, the zones. I talked to a real estate broker the other day and I wondered if it was a one-off, but he was talking about, not being able to sell properties that have zones. And, Keith, you and I have discussed this before.
Yeah.
The way it's set up right now, CWD testing is punitive. There is no incentive to test. So I had a guy call me that is on a deer lease in the hill country and said that his leaser had told him, if you send a CWD test in, I will null your lease. You will no longer have your lease. We'll kick you off my farm.
Wow.
Because if that guy wants to test his deer for CWD and it comes back positive, now all of a sudden his property is in a zone.
Yep.
And he's going to have a hard time selling it. So what we've been talking with the commission about is, hey, testing needs to be an incentivized program, not punitive. Landowners, CWD is not a big enough problem for it to be a punitive damages for landowners.
No doubt.
And we've discussed that there's no need for zones, because if you have a CWD positive breeding facility, that facility's shut down anyway. It can't move deer. There's no reason to have a 2-mile zone around it and then a 50 or 20 mile surveillance zone around that, and tie up all these other landowners around you when the disease is contained. One of the other things that we're saying is, it's here. CWD is here. I don't care where you go. If you're liable to test a deer and it may have CWD. It's in Texas. These zones aren't going to fix that. No. It's not going to change it. No rule is going to change it. It is here. So we've got to figure out a way to learn to live with it, and work toward what it looks like to be able to live with it without, one, punitive damages, and number two, to protect whitetail in general. I think during the quest of all of this, we've all lost sight of the fact that, I started this because I love deer. The conservation effort of it has just been pushed by the wayside through arguments and money and, all the devil-driven things, I guess somebody called it the other day. But I will say that the new commission is definitely got a different mindset than the way it was before. The new chairman, Hildebrand, definitely has a better grasp on CWD, and the TDA itself certainly has a better voice in the room. So
good. I wanted to back up just a little bit because you covered a broad range of topics right there, and we appreciate it. But one of the things that you were talking about is that antemortem testing, right? And I've seen you guys do that at the previous place where we worked. And, to say that it sounds just like it's a test, and how she was talking about how expensive it was, you can elaborate on this again, Jody, but they got to bring all those deer out of the pens, into the chute, put them down, sedate them, move them out, hang them, put them on a stretcher, and it's an anal test, correct? It's where you're cutting out the back of the anus, I guess. But
yes,
go ahead and explain that. It's not just some easy little task. It takes a lot of time and resources. It
is. It's invasive. So to do an antemortem, you have to bring it. There's two ways. You can do a rectum or you can do tonsil. The tonsil's way more invasive, and you can't properly clean the tools to avoid mechanical transmission. So for the rectal test, they've got to come in, be sedated, and then we have to take a piece about the size of a quarter from the inner lining of the rectum, put it in a slide, label it for that deer, and send it off. That sounds like a very small process, but it's not.
No.
There's a lot of blood involved. There is death loss involved. Some don't make it through it. So anytime we have to sedate a deer, you run that risk. So we try to not sedate them unless we have to. But everything from the sedation meds to having a vet there to do it, from the supplies to do it, to your death loss. All of that adds up in large costs.
Big
And
time.
to test a farm with just say 400 animals, I mean, you're looking at a smooth $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 depending on how it goes for you.
Gosh.
And it's got to be during a time of, you got to plan it during a time of year that's good for the animal. So we don't want to do it to does when we're trying to get them bred.
Right.
We don't want to do it to does when they're about to fawn. We don't want to do it to bucks while they're trying to grow antlers. We don't want to do it to them while they're in rut. So there's a lot of strategy that has to go into the timing of that test, and that test only lasts for 8 months. So once that 8 months is up, and if you haven't moved that deer, it's going to have to be tested again. So most deer are tested twice. So if I move a deer to you, Keith, and then you sell it and to somebody, and you have to test it too. So most deer are tested more than once anyway. So if I sell you a deer and then you sell it to a release site, you have to turn around and test it too, even though it has been tested within the last, it doesn't matter if it was 3 days ago.
Is that from breeder to breeder, or what if it's, we're a ranch and we're buying a stalker buck? Do we have to test it as well?
Yes. So it's from breeder to breeder and from breeder to the release site. So no matter what, those animals are tested, which, has raised the cost of a stalker, because obviously that cost is going to carry over just like anything else. But it also has allowed us to do business with each other. So I feel confident that I'm sending you a disease-free product, and you feel confident that you're receiving a healthy product. So those aspects of it, I think, have helped the industry. And I think it also helps the release site owners to know that they're getting a disease-free product that can make it through, all the things we're asking deer to do. We're asking it to give us a rectal test, then we're going to move him, then we're going to make him grow some antlers, and we're going to ask him to breed. There's a lot that goes into the animal itself. So strategically, it's very important to get those tests done at the right time. Well, that being the reason, my point being for that is there's a certain number of vets in the state of Texas that can do rectal biopsies. And those guys are tied up during that period of time.
I bet.
And it is, you have to have your stuff on point and scheduled. And
well, if you talk about a doe, you talk about a breeding cycle, then you talk about she's got her fawn, then she goes into milk production. There's really not a good time.
There's not.
There's always something major going on with a whitetail. And then you throw in the mix of there's a very small handful of vets out there that can do these types of tests, and working with their schedule, man, that's a tough road.
Yeah, it's a tall order for a deer breeder.
Very tall.
And those vets are a dying breed too, unfortunately.
They are.
Mr. Steve Schultz that she uses for all her stuff and that I use for some of my stuff. He's how old is he? 7? He's still a firecracker by all means, Steve. But he's they're just a dying breed, and
they are.
New ones coming up.
They are, and those that understand it and get it, understand why we're having to do it, agree with doing it, and all of those things. So, you're talking about a very, very, very small group of people, and then, the antemortem test is helpful for our industry, but the problem that we have is that test isn't given enough credit for what it cost and what the damages are to do it. So once we do that test, it's very, very, it's almost it's a slap in the face to hear somebody say, well, that test's only 80% accurate, or that it could still be moving, or, we can't 100% be sure that deer doesn't have CWD. Well, then why do it? If you go get screened for cancer, your test is only 80% accurate too.
That's right.
I just, when you're testing that many animals on a farm, if there is CWD there, it will show up. And on top of all of that antemortem testing, if something dies at your deer farm and you are a deer breeder, you have to antemortem test that death. So not only are we testing all the deer we're moving, we're testing every death. So where
Even
you
if it's
test
blue tongue or
any,
running
no
the
matter
fence and
what,
break their neck. I mean,
EHD, blue tongue, hits the fence, sees a dragonfly and decides to die, whatever, you have to test it. So no matter what. And, a lot of the people who don't understand that just aren't aware of that aspect of it. So that's why there's so many tests. And where you test intensely, you're going to find it. If we all sit in 30 people in a room with COVID and we test for COVID, somebody probably has it.
By God.
And if we don't test for it, we never knew they did, and everybody goes on. So
have y'all decided to just go back to the cattle world?
Yeah, we go back and forth.
Yeah,
no doubt.
I was
no
think it's
doubt.
funny as I wonder. I was talking to somebody the other day. And I told them, I said, I'm about 99% sure TPWD's killed way more deer than CWD.
Oh yeah,
No.
Yep, no doubt.
It's funny. Last year I was driving home from a hunt, and we went through 2 or 3 little small towns, and every one of those towns that had a deer processing facility, there was a table out there with TPWD asking people to donate so that they could get testing done. And it just seems that they're going very far to solidify. I guess it's to solidify the decisions that they've continued to make. Because I feel like to a degree, TPWD is a little bit out of their realm. They're trying to act like they're disease experts, which I think you said that before, and they need to leave that to the disease expert commissions.
Right.
So
Yeah.
it's pretty disheartening how it seems to be a big scare tactic as well.
A lot of people have thought that, and they did have their big scare scheme about a year ago with the billboards and everything, and I got to give Commissioner Hildman props for that, for demanding all of that be taken down.
Yes.
I mean, I've always said this is Texas. Our kids grow up deer hunting.
Yep.
It's part of our heritage. It's Texas, and there is no need to scare everybody about CWD. It's just pointless. And
Absolutely.
and I think you get some of the wrong people involved, and things just blow up.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Speaking of that, you were talking earlier too about
Go ahead.
there's, I guess, basically a shotgun approach to regulation and all that stuff up front. Everybody panicked and the sky was falling. What have they changed? I know they did a big depopulation deal. I mean, you and I know Chuck Frazier at Lone Wolf Whitetails here in Coolidge, just up the road from me. That was, I guess, about probably 2 years ago, a year and a half ago. They went there and they killed his entire herd, and he had a hell of a herd. But it was before Jody and them had gotten some other things in place to at least help with, the financial side of killing and burying all those deer. But talk about that. What was there the regulations and depopulations up front that really, put everybody in an uproar to kind of start this movement?
Well, before, if you had a CBD positive farm, your only option was depopulation. So it didn't matter what size your herd was, you're depopping. Well, fast forward, we're saying, hey, there's a way around all this. We can deal with CWD. We haven't cracked getting CWD positive farms completely open yet, but we have cracked the door of them being able to move deer to their release sites. So one of our biggest pushes that we have tried to explain is basically that we can ante-mortem test around things. We can test deer enough times to where we get rid of the ones that we know are carriers and then come in and just test every year for these farms. So, the Ox plan came into play. They've tested but what they've done with the amount of animals that they've tested, I think they're somewhere, don't quote me on this, but I think they're somewhere around 3,000 tests, which, so they're able to release deer to their release site. Then once they're killed in their release site, they have to be tested there as well. They've only had one positive through all of this, from the very beginning till now, but they also mitigated risk in the beginning. So we're saying, you get the positive, let us mitigate the risk. We'll agree to kill every deer in the pen with that animal and adjacent pens. And then we'll start testing everything else and go from there. Ones that test positive, let's kick out, go ahead and euthanize those. And then we just keep going forward. We haven't gotten to a perfect plan for that yet, but we're getting there. The Hunt County situation so you had the ox situation where they decided that we're going to mitigate the risk. We're going to get rid of the animals that are positive. And then you have the Hunt County situation that just kind of let it sit there and fester. There was no depopulation. It was just handled in a completely different way than what the ox plan was. And we saw what that did. There was 267 positives, I think, in the end. I think a very, very high percentage of those deer did test positive for CWD, but there was also no mitigated risk taken there. Right. Go to the ox plan, we're still at 1 positive. So we have figured out how we can live with it, how we can deal with it, what not to do. Unfortunately, the Hunt County situation was a good depiction of what not to do. The ox situation is a good depiction of what can be done. Unfortunately, with Hunt County, all the things that led up right before that depopulation, the TDA did write a letter to Parks and Wildlife in support of that depopulation, which, it pains me to say it. I have a lot of respect for Robert Williams and his farm and the things he's done in the deer business, but I didn't see any other way out. There was no future for those animals. I asked a guy who was pretty upset with me for that letter. I asked him, I said, well, if those deer were for sale tomorrow for $1, would you move them to your farm? And you just got quiet.
Yeah. It'd be hard to answer that one.
Yeah. So, mitigated risk have to be taken. On top of that, I know our farm, the farm that Heath and I worked at together, we're breeding for resistance. So there is a proven fact that we can DNA test these deer and get resistance, the codons and a GEBV number, which is a summary of their genetic merit to tell if they have resistance to disease. That's not just including CWD, it's including, all disease. But specifically the 96 codon is, basically it shows CWD resistance. So when you quantify all of that, deer breeders are breeding now for resistant codons. So the idea is to completely rid CWD behind the fence the way that they did with scrapies and sheep. It's the same type of prion, and it's the same concept, and we were able to do it in sheep. There's no reason why we can't do it in whitetail. So for a long, long time, everybody bred whitetail for one trait, and that was for antlers. Yep. See how big we can get them, how fast we can get them big, how early we can mature these things where they can, we can sell a 2-year-old with a 300-inch set instead of having to feed them till he's 4, those things. In that quest, we lost the other traits. We lost production, fertility, livability, disease control, all of those things. And now everybody kind of got brought back to the starting line again. And everybody's kind of had to breed differently. And it did kind of bring us all back to a level playing field. And now, in order to sell deer, you're going to have an S codon. It's just the way it is. So, it's no different than pivoting with cattle. If you're pivoting in the Angus industry or anything like that, we've all pivoted to this. And there were several ways to look at it. When all this happened, I didn't like it. One of my best bucks was a GG animal, did not have an S codon. But some of the ones that weren't worth as much are now worth more because they did. So had to get over that hump and learn to live with it and learn to adapt and go on. The codon system gives us another way to market our animals, gives us livability, and it also lets us know early on, hey, is this animal a good product or not? Do I need to breed this way anymore? You can compare it to an EPD in cattle, but not really. I had a cattleman ask me the other day to explain it to him, and I said, well, the GVV is a genetic merit, a genetic summary of all of it. Whereas EPDs, you can break down dollar beef and milk production, all those things. We could probably do that in deer, but right now we're not. It's just in a genetic merit summary. So we want a SS code at 96, and we want a negative, as far negative GV number as we can. So that's the future of the deer industry. I know I just rambled and said a whole lot of information, but
no, I'm glad you did. That's good stuff.
That's why we're headed as deer breeders. I've always told everybody that, some of the breeders that didn't want to do it, I've said, well, hey, if you don't want to do that, that's fine. But I'm going to have that tool, and I'm going to sell more deer than you do, because my deer are going to be good and they're going to have Excodons. So, it's like being you want to sell a XLT or a platinum, So.
Right. So that talks about, with those genetic markers in those deer, I guess, how has it changed on rural enforcement? How has it changed on, I guess, the TPWD commission? You mentioned Mr. Hildebrandt and how good a job he's done. And you obviously have been a very integral part in putting all that together and making it go. So what's their responsibilities now?
So it's been a really, really big uphill battle, because for years, the TDA just didn't have a voice that was heard. It's deer breeders this, deer breeders that, or whatever. So we've worked super hard to change our basically our reputation at the Capitol. I got to give our lobbyists some credit on that. They've been able to put me in the right places at the right time and that sort of thing. But also, between Kevin Davis and our executive director and the entire team at TDA, we've just been I appreciate their open mind as to what my ideas are in dealing with these guys on the commission. The whole commission does not like deer breeders. There are a few that don't. And there are a few that I feel are unbiased either way. They just want to do the right thing. So, it's kind of one of those things where if they don't like a deer breeder, I'm really not going to be able to change that. But those who are neutral, or those who are on the fence, we can talk about it and kind of get an understanding. One of the biggest things is that when I buy a breeding permit from the state of Texas, I'm allowed to do that. No different than I'm allowed to buy a driver's license or, building permit, whatever. So it is not against the law for me to have a high fence or for you to have a release site or whatever. So it's really nobody's business to judge the fact that I have that. Unfortunately, because it's not against the law. Unfortunately, there's been some bad actors in the deer industry over the years who have caused some hatred for that. And I feel like there's rule and law breakers and everything. But they've given us a bad face. So we've worked really, really, really hard to change that. I will say that the recent CWD scares have done what I've called disinfected kind of the business. I feel like it, and I'll probably get slapped on the wrist for saying this, but it did rid us of some of the there's people that just simply don't need to be doing this.
That's right.
And, they're no longer doing it. So the regulation sometimes isn't all bad. Going forward, Executive Director Yaskowitz and Hildebrand's, what they've asked of me is, hey, give us what the good breeding practices are. Show us what it looks like, what you guys really do, so we're not hearing it just from somebody, some hater, some TWA person or something like that. So, develop relationships. So we've done that. We have developed a really good relationship with the TWA, and we meet with them around once a month to discuss what's going on, and so that we can mitigate some of the misinformation and uneducational crap that comes from that side of things, just from not knowing. But going forward, what Commissioner Hildebrand has asked is, hey, we need a solution to this. He's asked staff. He's asked deer breeders. He's asked conservationists. He's asked everybody inside of those commission rooms, hey, come up with a solution because what we're doing is not fixing it. And he specifically said, we're behind the 8 ball. We need to get ahead of this. How do we get ahead of this? How do we get ahead of this? And staff has still yet to come out with a way to get ahead of it. TDA is saying, we have the answer for you here. You're just going to have to let us do it and show you. We're your only lab. We're the only way for you to figure it out. You can't figure this out in the wild. We can do this for you, but we also can't be shut down and do it for you.
Yeah.
So it has been discussed a lot that testing is punitive. There is no incentive to test at all. So those discussions are in the mix. I think right now, one of the biggest things going forward for the commission is that, that antemortem test needs to count for more than just the day that deer was moved. If you antemortem test a deer and send it to a breeder, and then that breeder tests positive for CWD, you shouldn't be shut down because you tested that deer before it ever got there.
Absolutely.
And right now you are. And so going forward, those are some of the biggest things. When I test a deer and send it, Keith, if you have a release site, if I test a deer and send it to you, you know that you got that deer disease free. That's it. That test there should be a hard barrier upon that release. So the risk was mitigated. It came from a farm that tested, a third of their herd. So that release site should not be tied back to that farm once they receive that deer, if that farm were to pop positive. The commission did get rid of tiers, which was one of my main goals when I took on TDA presidency. I had told a friend of mine, and he said, you'll never get it done. You'll never be able to do that. And I said, well, my main goal is to get rid of tiers because it makes no sense, and it's not in Texas Animal Health language. It's only in parks, TPWD's language. They're supposed to work in lockstep, and this is not what's happening, and I feel like we can make it happen. And at this last commission meeting we did, which was the biggest mountain in the world to climb, but we were able to get it accomplished. And that's not just thanks to TDA, and it's thanks to everybody who reached out to their commissioner. These podcasts, the noise that people make, things like this are huge for just more regulation not being passed down. And that's another thing that the commission has said, like, we don't want to have more regulation. Right. We want to shrink zones. We want to get rid of some of this regulation. And, I call it dinosaur regulation, which is, rules that were made that are in the way of other rules that aren't needed anymore because we have this new rule.
Yeah.
And that's what I was trying to explain to him. I said, look at this, guys. None of this is needed because you have all of this, and this has never been taken away. I showed a state rep a picture of Cowboy Stadium. I said, this person sitting up here in the nosebleed has COVID. This person sitting down here with the cheerleaders doesn't. That person goes home. And now all those people at that person's home have to die because the person up there in the nosebleed, not sitting with the cheerleaders, has COVID. That's what this is.
Yeah, it's a damn good analogy.
And I just had the picture, and I circled it, and I showed all the things, and I said, now how does this make sense? He said, it doesn't. I said, well, that's
bingo.
I need your legislative help here because this is what it looks like. This farm over here in Lubbock has this farm over here in Refugio shut down. And they're not even, they have no tie to one another because they might have had a deer who had a deer from somebody else. So, I showed it I actually had one of the staff members come to my farm, and I had my farm audit. I had an audit of our whole farm and, showed, okay, I got to do all this. I got to kill all these 61 head so that I can test my herd, so that I can antemortem test. And he was like, wait a minute, explain that to me again. And I'm like, you work there.
Yeah.
I'm doing your job. Like, I'm showing you what you're telling me.
Yeah.
So you tell me. And he couldn't.
They don't even know their own rules and regulations. There's too much gray area.
There's too much
and
gray.
that's what I hear so much when you're talking, when it comes to those regulations. There's so many gray areas, and there's new things that are implemented that overlap, like what you just said. This is put into place to help, but it doesn't take away what was back here that was purely gray.
Right.
And so I guess at that point, it's up to the person's discretion, or the inspector that comes out, or whoever comes out, if they want to be up in the new or they want to stay back in the old. I mean, you can't run.
Got to the point.
You can never get to the finish line, have you will, if there is one, by operating that way.
Well, and then we get what they would call a herd plan, which in the beginning I hated herd plans. I was like, this is ridiculous. This doesn't make sense, and they still don't. But the one positive thing about a herd plan is it is a modification of the rule. So there is a way to get around the rule through your herd plan. It just has to be negotiated through basically Hunter Reed, which is a whole nother hurdle. I will say he's getting better and more reasonable. The commission, I think, has said, hey, figure out how to get these people open. We heard that at the last commission meeting. Hey, let's figure out a way to get these people open. What can we do? And those are words that I never thought we'd hear. I damn near cried in that room when they said that, because it's just been this giant wall.
Finally moving forwards.
Yeah, it felt like we had this huge breakthrough. But that being said, it's because of everything that everyone's done. Public voice matters. Legislative pushes matter. I at the last commission meeting, I listened to Commissioner Doggett talk about the real estate end of it. And he said the same thing. He said, I've asked people about these surveillance zone, and y'all are wanting to take in 2 million more acres in the Panhandle into a surveillance zone. And he's like, those people can't sell their property, and there's something wrong with that. We should have punitive damages on testing. But that being said, unless a strong voice comes out and says, hey, this isn't right, it just festers and sits there. And so that's the hurdle. Is just knowledge, public knowledge, and the right knowledge. So
we spoke about speaking of real estate. Obviously I work for Texas Ranch Sales, and just this very week, one of my properties I have listed in West Texas got involved with a deal with Texas Parks and Wildlife, and they're wanting him to kill every animal he's got. And obviously the first call that I made was to Jody, and I got those guys linked up. And a situation like that, he moved some deer in there from a breeder 3 years ago, 4 years ago, that might be exposed or whatnot, Jody. And now they're coming back to him. He's got this plan they wanted to kill all his deer at first. And now I think you're trying to mitigate some of that stuff through your knowledge with him. And I mean, I don't want to talk about who it is or where it is or any of that stuff, but just a case example, that ranch is for sale today, and we've got some movement on it. And then we get hit this brick wall Monday of this exact same case we're talking about. What kind of situation will you do in a situation like that?
So right now we're going over that herd plan, looking at it, seeing what we can do to mitigate and tone it down. Basically, at this point there will be some testing involved, but we are able to look at these things and tone them down to where it's a doable situation. Right now, the way that herd plan looks, I mean, unless he goes out there and kills all his animals, he's tied up. And like he told me on the phone, he said, I kind of want to pull it off the market because I don't want to hand this problem to somebody else.
Yep.
And that's 99% of people. So let me pull this back, redline this herd plan, look at it, and we'll go back to them. So they are negotiable. There is testing involved, but at this point, we are able to kind of go through these things and and look at them and make them better. I wish that those deer were tested before they ever went there, antemortem tested. If we had this hard barrier on release, like we're asking for, he wouldn't even be tied up. It would be no big deal because those animals were sent there with a negative antemortem test.
See, I didn't know that. That's huge. I mean, that should carry all the weight. That should take care of that issue.
That should take care of it. So those deer went there 2 years ago, and at that point, every deer sent to a release site had to be tested. So they've already received one antemortem test.
Gosh.
And so that's what we're saying, and that's what we're needing legislative people to say, and people like you guys and anybody we can get to talk about it. Hey, that antemortem test needs to count. And once that release site receives that deer, he got it through an antemortem test from a certified herd, which means a herd that's tested for CWD for over 6 years.
Right.
That test is good. And, I believe in it enough to where I'll buy deer from people and bring them to my farm from a CWD lab test.
There you go.
And so I don't see any reason why why parks can't see that test as a hard barrier. I have talked to some people within legislative bodies and, different people within the department, we'll say, that agree with hard barrier, and they've said, let's have a drink when we get this done. It's the next thing you need to get done, stuff like that. But it's just, there's just a lot of, basically hard barrier upon release is one of those deals where other rules are going to get in the way of a rule. And that's the only reason why we can't make it happen today. We're going to have to, there's a lot of moving parts before that can happen, but way more than what I had originally thought. So
do you ask yourself what the hell you've gotten yourself into from time to time, I guess?
I do, and there's a few people that I'd like to throat punch for making me this. But
yeah, I'll tell y'all right now, she may look innocent on this camera right now, but I wouldn't want to take her on for nothing in the world. I guarantee you, she will tell you how it is.
Yeah, John True, our former president, I told him, I said, I'll do this deal, but you will do it with me. So that poor guy, he thought he was getting out of the deal, but he gets a daily phone call. But yeah, it's been
the important thing I think people should know too is everything that we're talking about from CWD to the actions that TPWD has taken to everything you've mentioned. It's affecting more than just deer breeders. I mean, being in a state that is a multi-billion-dollar state for hunting, particularly on the whitetail side. I mean, how many people have been out there that are hunting that now have to go through all this stuff to have their deer tested before they can take it home, before they can take it to a processor, so on and so forth. And I think that what people need to understand is, yes, when it comes to scrolling on YouTube, scrolling on Facebook, whatever, and you run across stuff like this where we're talking about CWD, the breeders are the ones that are standing up being with the loudest voice, because at the end of the day, they've invested millions of dollars into these ranches, into these animals. They take care of them like they're their own kids, but the average hunter is getting affected as well.
Absolutely.
And I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, when you're saying we need more voices, we need more people talking about it, that's what you're referring to. It's not just the same breeders that are standing up there, pounding their fist on the desk. If you're a hunter in this state or you hunt in this state, this is something that you need to get on this wagon and stand behind and support, because that's a lot of what you've mentioned in those steps moving forwards have been because of those actions, being able to have people behind you, support you, stand there and have good examples, because it's almost like you just got to write a cartoon figure out to show them in black and white how they're doing it wrong, like bringing in a picture of Texas Stadium. Oh, it's like, ding, the light bulb went off.
Absolutely.
So, I mean, it can't just be your voice and the voice of deer breeders. I think all hunters in this state need to come together, and we need to stand at the top of the mountain. We need to scream this. And on that's why I think that as hunters, we should support, organizations like TDA, because without that support, you don't have any wind in your sails. And that's the only thing that's keeping the love and heritage of whitetail and hunting and alive right now.
Right. And, deer breeders I call us conservationists on steroids. I mean, absolutely. We're enhancing the whitetail deer. We're not trying to make them worse. We're trying to fix it. And we're the only way to fix it.
Yep.
And we've been trying to fix it, but for a long time now, but with this regulation, it just makes it difficult. But yeah, I mean, I always tell everybody I see, become a member. The numbers of members that we have is I get asked all the time by different legislative people, by commissioners, and when we stand up at the commission to speak, they know how many people are behind us and how many people we're speaking for. And we may not all agree on every topic and have the same idea on every topic, but we all do love whitetail.
That's right.
Mule deer, all deer. And I love hunting.
Well, whether you love a deer breeder or you don't love a deer breeder, at the end of the day, who gives a crap? Do you love the whitetail?
Exactly.
Do you love to hunt? Then we need to stand together in that aspect there.
Right.
That's what matters. Because at the end of the day, yes, deer breeders are standing there because it's their business. It's their livelihood. I think it's safe to say no deer breeder starts breeding deer to become a millionaire, because, that doesn't happen overnight. No. They do it because they love deer. And we all need to be there to support them, whether you agree with them or not.
100%. And just be committed to conservation. I mean, if you look at the conservation effort and think of it in that regard, and stay committed to that, it's a no-brainer. Yeah. And we speak for release sites, for hunters, for breeders. And I talk to people of all walks of life all the time, and with their concerns and we're doing all we can. And podcast, when Keith texted me about the podcast, I was like, hey, absolutely. I never turned down a podcast.
Well, we're glad you didn't.
Yeah. Cause it helps everybody to understand. And,
Well, I mean, we could probably talk about this for hours and hours and hours, but I guess, Jody, once again, thank you for taking the time to come and visit with us. Been good and informative. Hopefully we can get some people to listen to this podcast, and it makes a difference. We're Texas Deer Association, Texas Strong, the largest economy of whitetail hunters in the nation, just like Brandon said earlier. I mean, it's pretty simple. Even the regular Smo Joe that's just out there hunting 50 acres, it could affect you. And go join TDA, just like she just talked about. Click and join, and we're going to share this all over the world. And we certainly appreciate their work, like you said, like Jody said, that they're the labs that are behind the science, and without them, it's not going to happen. So, just been good. Jody, you have anything to follow up with to close it out with, and we'll get out of your hair.
No, I appreciate you guys reaching out. It means a lot, and I appreciate the support. So
absolutely, we appreciate you coming on here. One more time, I'm going to say it just like Keith said it. If you are a hunter in this state, you need to go to the TDA website and you need to join. This is the only way to keep this legacy alive and keep this heritage alive. That's it. They're standing there fighting every single day, as you've heard Miss Jody talk. And without people like Miss Jody and her team and organizations like TDA, we could end up like some of them Midwestern states. So we don't want that. But
no, we don't.
I really appreciate it. I appreciate everything that you've shared with us today. And if there's anything we can do further, you just call on us. We're there in a heartbeat.
I appreciate you guys. Thanks, Keith.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.